In part 1 of this video series, we determined that our subframe connection to the chassis has broken. And that's a very common problem with the E36s and the early model E46s.
Okay, so we've dropped the subframe, and that's exactly the right orientation of how it would go in the car. The front two bushings up in here in the front, those two we pulled the nut off there, and there's a post that's still stuck in the car. We'll get that out in a little bit. And then we took off this long bolt here, and then this, it just kind of, it fell out. This is the bracket that's supposed to be up inside the car. That bolt is still attached to it. We're going to leave it there for just a little while. We just cleaned the subframe up. We're going to now work on getting all these bushings swapped out, and then once we do, we're going to actually mount that piece back on there because I need that for placement. And let me show you the hole where that thing just dropped out of. So we literally did not have to take that other bolt off of that bushing. That whole bracket just fell right. That came out with it. So we'll have to repair that area.
Fair enough.
Okay, so here's the subframe. It's laying on the floor. It's actually upside down from the way it would mount in a car. So keep in mind when we're looking at the left side of the screen, it's actually the right side of the car. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to take a digital picture of each of these bushings so we know the orientation. For instance, this will be the passenger side of the car, and this is the rear. And there's an arrow right here and an arrow right there, so that's front and back. Other than that, it can go in this way or this way, doesn't matter. And then there's this little lip, so we're going to, after we press this out, when we press this one in, we're going to press it down until this lip right there touches our frame. Both this rear and that rear, actually the exact same part number, those will be installed the same way. This one here, this is the differential rear mount, and one of the things we got to make sure we want to get this exact same spacing, so we're going to take a measurement of that spacing to make sure, because it's actually inset on this side, but we want it to be sitting in their exact same location. So we're going to take a note of, and it's got an orientation too. You can see how it's got kind of a left and right position there. So we'll be taking pictures of that and make sure we get that in place. Plus, this is metal on metal. This is that one that fails the most, and people try and replace this while this subframe's in the car, which is what you would do if this is the only problem. The problem is this metal to metal, it's kind of rusted together. It's almost fused. It's extremely hard. We're going to douse this with a product called Croil. Croil kind of eats up rust, and it's incredible penetrant, and it'll penetrate the very, very small cracks. So we're going to do that, let it sit for a couple hours, and then we'll be able to press that piece out and clean that all up. Here's our rear differential mounts. Again, those have slots. Not that they're round holes, but they do have an orientation. We'll make note of that as well as how far they go in. This is this would ultimately be the passenger side front subframe mount. It's actually got a slot in it, so we got to make sure we get that slot in the right direction. And then here's the driver's side. It's just a hole, and we'll make note of that as well. So we're going to work on, first of all, lubricating all these with Croil. Let it sit a couple hours, and then we'll start pressing this stuff out. Alright, so we're halfway through this rear differential bearing. We had to drill a bunch of holes around the perimeter through the rubber, and ultimately we're able to, a lot of work, punch out that center metal piece. And now I'm going to take this hacksaw, and we're slowly working through. I'm going to cut through this metal piece, and that way I can then collapse it, and we'll be able to pull that out. So man, we've done a lot of different things on different pieces that you will never see, because most of them didn't work. One thing, I thought I'd be able to just throw this whole thing in my floor press and press these things out, but they're such odd angles that it doesn't fit. So we got to come up with a better mousetrap. But I'd see someone else did it this way, so we're going to at least get this guy out this direction. So again, I'm just going to cut this little slot right here. It's pretty difficult, but we're going to get that slot cut and ultimately get that guy out. So we'll be back. Okay, I've got the subframe oriented. This is the upper surface, so this mounts toward the car, and that's the lower surface. We're getting ready to reinstall the rear carrier bushing. for the differential, and clearly from our pictures it was installed, the one we pulled out, which was in good condition, it wasn't broken, and I bet you it was replaced. It was installed in this orientation, and I think it's wrong, because basically the differential sits here in the middle, and the little arm, that tab that comes here and the bolt goes through here, would rest on here, and you would be pushing it against this center piece, and you'd get a lot of rubbing on this piece. It just physically doesn't make sense. The fact that this protrudes out some, this really needs to be installed in that position so that this piece that's protruding out would give a little bit of clearance here so the differential can move without rubbing this piece. It'd be grabbing this piece and doing that. So I went online. There's not any really good pictures of that. There's a couple videos I saw that it almost clearly shows it doing this way. So interestingly, I'm going to install this opposite of the way I pulled it out. So we're going to do that next. We're going to get that installed in that orientation, and we'll be good to go. You may be bottoming out on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so take that it, or did it bottom out?
No, that's it.
So we can check this on this side. Alright, just under the yes, that's flush. Okay, so here's where we ended up. We've got this surface here is flush with this surface, which is exactly the way the old orientation was. And I know that this whole shaft all the way through is the same length as the other one. So I know that this position is right where it needs to be to accept the differential. And then the other thing we made sure is the orientation. This thing was going. This is a slotted surface. It's not even a hole. It's a slot, and it was going horizontal, which makes sense when you mount it, because the pressure on this thing when that differential rotates is up and down. So you want it to be able to have some play when you mount it, but yet when it's actually doing its function, you want it not to have that play. So the bolt that goes in there will will be tight up and down. So that's how we installed ours, and I'm pretty sure that's accurate. Okay. Ready?
Am I turning it?
Okay, the plan of attack is going to be this. This mounting bracket needs to be relocated in the car. It actually, there's a square hole in the very bottom of the car that this pulled right out of. We got to relocate this bracket in the car, get it welded in. There's the sheet metal that you see from the bottom of the car. It goes underneath this bracket. There's a middle piece of sheet metal that you can't see unless you cut the car kind of open, and that's what the top part of this mounts to. And then about a ½ inch above this is another sheet of metal that is the inside of the trunk. And part of the kit we've got, it talks about cutting out a hole to reinforce these welds anyway. You can see where my welds actually failed. So I'm going to cut out that hole first of all and look at this middle piece of metal that this mounts to, and get it all cleaned up. I'll probably get this is a plug weld here. I'm going to get these cleaned up, and we're going to get this mounted back in the car with this bracket on here, so that by doing that, we're going to have the left and right, front and back spatial for this bracket will be good, and then this bracket just needs to butt up against that middle sheet metal, and that'll allow us to where we need to tack this back in. That'll get this located, and that's exactly what we need. Then we'll do a lot of reinforcement on the top. We'll get the sheet metal all fixed up on the bottom and get that tack welded in. Plus, again, the reinforcement kit that I bought even adds another layer underneath this and spreads. It's a piece maybe this big that really helps distribute the load across that. So we're going to start off by cutting out a little window opening in the trunk so we can see the piece where this mounts. We're going to get this mounted up in there and see and get this prepped to get this spot welded back in. Okay, we're going to start off with the reinforcement kit. I've got in order to get that piece welded back in there, went and took the plate that's here and scribed with a Sharpie around the outside of that. That's where this plate will be welded to. Then you come in a 1/4 inch and mark it. We're going to cut on this inside 1/4 inch and open up this little window here so we can see the top side of where that mounting bracket gets welded to. We got to re-weld that in. So let's get that cut out. Okay, so we've cut our little window out, and we can see that those 3 spot welds from the factory, that's what failed. And once that failed, that bracket came loose and it pulled through the bottom of the car. So we're going to get that lined back up and get that bracket welded back to that spot, plus some additional welds per the instructions of the reinforcement kit. I think it's going to do pretty good. So we'll get that prepped and get it ready for welding. Alright, let's take a look at that one. And that one, the spot welds are intact. Because that side's in compression, it actually pushes up on that one, so there's not a lot of stress on those welds, I don't think. Anyway, we're going to get that doctored up as well. So here's after cleaning that surface, mounting that bracket up there with that bolt, and then filling in the plug welds and perimeter welding. This is the passenger rear reinforcement bracket. So that wraps up our repairs. Just finished putting in these reinforcement brackets by Turner Motorsports, and went in pretty flawlessly, I guess. A lot of upside down welding, which is pretty difficult, but definitely worth it. This is really going to secure the bottom side, and this subframe is going to be rock solid now. So next we're going to be reassembling, put everything back together.
If you've enjoyed or learned from the contents of this video, please click the like button. It's the simplest way to provide me some feedback to let me know that it was helpful. On the left, there's a link to a playlist that will contain all the videos for this vehicle, as well as a link to subscribe to my channel with all my other goodie videos. And remember, with a little bit of insight, you can do it too.